METS Ignited is one of the 6 industry growth centres, which was set up about 5 years ago by the federal government. MET stands for Mining Equipment Technology and Services. So essentially, METS Ignited represents and tries to assist the suppliers to the mining industry, in particular the technology suppliers to the mining industry, to grow and expand. What we are charged with doing for the federal government is accelerating commercialisation of innovations, and the WISE program obviously plays to that strongly. We want to enhance the industry capabilities of industry and the workforce itself, and again, the WISE program is aligned with that. We're also try and grow exports. Now, that's not exports of iron ore, it's exports of the technology. We have a great opportunity in Australia to be able to generate a lot of extra income for the country by exporting our technology that our METS companies are developing, and indeed already do very successfully around the world. We also do a little bit of work in regulatory reform, but that's not particularly relevant today. So we have various sort of programs that we run, or lines of activity. One of them is project funds, which I'm also involved with fairly heavily, and we've put probably about $6-7 million into companies in Western Australia to develop technologies for mining, and $15 million across the country. We run masterclasses, which are educational type programs, programs like the WISE program we'll be talking about today. Accelerators, there's one currently running. It's in Queensland, but it's being run by Atomic Sky, a local Perth organisation, and based on the successful Quantum TechX accelerator that was run earlier this year in Perth. We've been active in clustering, and we have 3 active clusters in Queensland, one around robotics and automation, one around tailings dams and tailings management, and one around data and data science. We're also looking at introducing clustering programs into Western Australia as well, and we're obviously doing some work in international markets. So some of the things that are happening specifically in WA, we have been working with JETSI, Jobs, Tourism, Science and Innovation, state government, for a number of months now, and that's culminated with the announcement of a $20 million automation and robotics precinct at Neerabup, just north of Perth, and that's just in the planning stages now, so that should be up and running. Well, it'll take a while. It's a fairly large initiative, as you can see, and that's really going to be able to provide a facility where METS companies can take their technology and demonstrate them to the mining industry, test them and demonstrate them to the mining industry. Miners are going to be able to come along and try out new technology without the risks of having to do that on mine sites. So that's a great initiative. At UWA, we've sponsored a living lab there, so you can take your IoT device along, your sensors, other equipment, and trial them in a simulated mining environment, which will then allow you to demonstrate their capacity and capability to mining companies, and so you'll be able to sell the equipment and services to them. Very, very sort of aligned with the WISE program at Curtin. A couple of other test sites around Australia that we're working with. There's one in New South Wales and also up in Mackay in Queensland. So future industry and skills, we're working on that, developing those skills. The WISE program is a very, very good example of that type of initiative. We're also supporting the WA Data Science Innovation Hub with programs that they've been running. In terms of sort of other technologies, there's an organisation called the ERDI Test Lab, which has just been launched in Perth in the CBD, and that addresses the issue of interoperability and gives companies the ability to go and test their software and essentially get it tested to see whether it is interoperable. It can be operated in conjunction with other software packages on mine sites. And there are now international standards being developed so that you will be able to get sort of accreditations certain levels of standardisation. It's going to be very important for the mining industry in the future. Project funds, we've talked a little bit about. We're providing co-investment to develop technologies, and also the TAM initiative, Transformative Automation in Mining and METS, which my colleague Gareth Dean here in Perth runs. So we have a miners reference group that we're working with to identify and help solve some common problems. And then there's the National Accelerator, which is a quantum TX model which was developed in Perth. So there's just a real quick overview of what METS Ignited does. So we are also supporting the WISE program by sponsoring a couple of places on it. And I will now hand over to Tom in order to be able to go back to what the WISE program is specifically all about. So I'll just drop out of that and unshare my screen. Okay. So Tom, can I ask you to share your screen and give us the information?
So thank you, Peter. Let me just see if I can get this to work. Let me just share this and go full screen, 2 seconds. Okay, how's that? Does that come through?
That's great, yep.
Excellent. So thanks, Peter. So yeah, just hi everyone. My name is Tom Gurka. I work for Cisco and run the innovation centres here in Australia and New Zealand. Now, to my right is Lenka Grant, who's going to smile and wave at the moment. We're actually in the same room, although it looks very different. Lenka actually runs the WISE program for us, Innovation Central Perth. So thanks, Peter. So as you said, what I'll do is I'll give a quick introduction to Innovation Central Perth, and we'll jump into the meat of what WISE is, and then give some examples. To the people on the call, please ask questions in the chat and we will come back to them. Although we do have a Q&A at the end, if I see something pop up that looks of interest, I'm happy to cover that in a little bit more detail. Just before we get into Innovation Central, and for many people, I think this is fairly obvious, but worth just touching on it, is sort of why we created Innovation Central Perth and why Cisco and other organisation invests so much in helping companies digitalise. And just for clarity, we do use two terms. They sound very similar. One is digitise and the other one is digitalise. For clarity, we understand that digitalise is how we help businesses adopt digital, and that's across everything that they do. Now, what we also very strongly believe is in that process of digitalising a business, you need to digitise. And what we mean by that is start to measure. So turn the analog into digital and actually measure things. And it'll make more sense as we go through and as we explain the role of Innovation Central Perth. So just to touch on some of the work that we've been doing with IMD in Switzerland. So Cisco has been sponsoring this research for about 5 years now, and it just looks at mapping out the impact of digital and the impact that it's going to have on different businesses across different verticals. And some of the key things, and they haven't changed in the sort of the 5 years, is that the belief that 3 out of the 10 leaders in each of the verticals will be disrupted by digital technology. Now, as I said, we've done that 3 times now. The results are very similar. What we're starting to see, though, in this particular diagram, and the reason we call it a vortex, is because it basically everything digital sucks businesses into adopt it, and if you don't adopt it, you basically get jettisoned. And there's lots and lots of examples of them. I'm not going to talk about that in detail today. I mean, if you have heard us speak about that before, and there's also a lot of white papers that talks about the need for businesses to digitalize. Because of that, because of the need for businesses to adopt this technology, Cisco's invested in education and programs globally for many years. We invested here in Australia in a couple of locations, and it fits across a world map of innovation centres. And so in partnership with many of the other groups inside Cisco, we've worked with organisations across the world to build what we called innovation centres. We're very fortunate in Australia to have two. So we have an Innovation Central Perth, which is an alliance between Woodside Energy, CSIRO's Data 61, Curtin University, and Cisco. And our focus is there: resources and energy, agriculture, urban innovation. And then on the East Coast, we partnered initially with Department of Primary Industries, New South Wales Farmers Association, Data 61, and University of New South Wales. A couple of years ago, we moved from the focus on primary industry to a focus on transport. And we have many examples of the work that we're actually doing there. What we've also done is, from a global perspective, focusing on innovation centres, but Cisco, in partnership with our universities, has actually now doubled down, and we've created what was called this National Industry Innovation Network, and that's where we're investing in chairs in different universities across Australia. And the ones that you can see here with Curtin University in intent-based networking. So we are sponsoring a chair. We're also doing digital health with Flinders. We're doing IoT and artificial intelligence with La Trobe, digital transport with UNSW, and exploring other opportunities with other universities. So again, it fits within this broad theme of how do we adopt digital across every single vertical. A little bit now more about what actually happens here in the centre. So the centre's been running 4.5 years now, and the functions that we've provided is really around 5 different areas. So one is innovation workshops, and we'll go through that and explain sort of a day in the life of a customer or a year in the life of a customer. So trying to look at areas where technology can come and disrupt it, bring that together and actually share it. And similarly then to the workshop, actually workshop through those things. We also then run ideation workshops, and I will go through in a bit more detail exactly how that actually works. We do collaboration events. But the primary objective of the centre is actually to get into a project with a customer and to actually help that customer transition through this whole digitisation journey. And I'll go through in a little bit more detail around that. Now we are looking at, so at the end of this year, Innovation Central Perth, the alliance for 5 years will be coming to an end, and we're now looking at the next version of Innovation Central at the moment. It will be going ahead. And the structure, all the things that we've learned over the previous 5 years will be implemented in developing a new alliance going forward. So let's just talk about the process that we've seen, and we've seen this common in every single customer that we've spoken to. And I talked about the difference between digitize and digitalize. So this digitalization journey starts with collecting information, what we call digitize, which gives us then the ability to analyze it, then optimize it, and then automate. And it doesn't really matter which vertical we go into. So for example, in education, we like to count lots of things. So the number of students in rooms. So for example, one of the challenges, is space occupancy. Well, it was a challenge before the pandemic, not so much of a challenge now, but hopefully the challenge will come back. But how are we actually utilising that space? Well, it starts with collecting the information. So what's the most effective way to count the number of students and staff that you have in rooms? So that's that digitize, which then allows us to analyse it, which then leads us to optimizing it, and that might be optimizing the schedule of the calendar of events for the day, for the week. And you've got to balance complete optimization with humans and the fact that they like to go to the same place each time. And then we want to automate that. So then the process of how do we then get to an ability which we can automate. It's the same for parking. So one of the challenges that we have here, we've got 6,000 bays, and be up to 20,000, 30,000 people here at a time. So how do you get people to parking bays? Well, the first thing you need to do is count how many bays you have available, how many people are coming on, etc. And we go through the same. And that's the same if we go to an LNG plant, whether we go to a mine, whether we go to a farm, whether we go to a factory, a transportation network. So everyone goes through this journey. And the really important part is how do we digitize and how do we do that cost effectively? So one of the real themes that we have here in the centre is allowing organisations to rapidly understand what's the right technology to use to capture that information, and how do we do that cost effectively? So we take people through that process. Now, typically, the way it works, and when I say typically, we have lots of ways to work with customers, but typically what we do is we start with a challenge, and we have this design sprint process. Typically a process that we use when an organization's not sure that the problem can be solved, or they've solved it, but it's cost prohibitive and they're looking at different ways of doing it. We work with a customer, we try and frame their challenge statement so it doesn't include the answer in the challenge statement. So let me give you an example of that. So one of the things when working with primary industry was there was a challenge around connecting things in the agricultural, especially if we go into the non-regional areas. How do we do that cost effectively? So a challenge statement that includes the answer is, how do we deploy 4G and 5G across farming? That's not a challenge statement we like. We prefer to have a challenge statement that says, how do we potentially collect information that allows us to optimize which type of grain we plant and to ensure maximum yield. So we try and put the business challenge in there. We've done this many, many times. And that challenge statement, we work with a customer, we frame that. And then what we do is we bring the customer into the center, and we're now working on a virtual model of that as well. And we typically have 50% of the customer and 50% not of the customer. And the 50% not of the customer is typically made up of students, researchers, industry experts. And we mix those people together and we mash them up. So we have diversity of thought, and we do that by literally mixing people up of different ages, genders, experience, and the rest of it. And then we go through a design thinking sprint, and it's typically half a day. What then comes out of that is ideas for a proof of concept. And during the process, we try and steer the ideas to something that we can actually test. So come up with the idea of a proof of concept. We then go through a validation exercise of, does it really make sense, one, for us to do that with the customer, or, the customer might just to do that themselves back inside their business. If it does make sense to do it with us, i.e. you want to use a technology vendor, you want to work with researchers and students, etc., or we bring it in and we develop a one-pager, and the one-pager basically says, what can we achieve in 3 months? What are the people you need, both from our side and from yours? And then what does success look like? Well, then we run the project, and the outcome of the project is, yes, it's possible, no, it's not. And it's very much around rapid prototyping with the view to actually convince the business that it's worth doing. And we try and, spend the least amount of money and effort up front to give us the most amount of confidence. So rather than writing lots and lots of expressions of interest and RFPs and huge amounts of documents to define something that we're not really sure is possible, we can use the Innovation Centre and the process here to actually achieve that. So in summary of Innovation Central Perth, really around trying to open things up, leverage industry standards, really work in a collaborative and a partner ecosystem. So that's it from ICP. There's an hour session or multiple hour session we can go through, but hopefully, Peter, that touches on Innovation Central for the audience. Now into our WISE program, which everyone's here. So our Wireless Industry Sensor Environment program that, thank you, Peter, for coming in and sponsoring and hosting this event, and Lenka as well. Thank you so much for doing that and giving me an opportunity to talk a little bit about that. So our WISE program, as I said, Wireless Industrial Sensor Environment, is a program that we put in place, and it actually came out, and thanks to Woodside, who was looking at a way of connecting devices wirelessly on an LNG plant. And we did a lot of work with Woodside around that. And they said to us, look, we really think you should build a program and make that available to all. And so we built the WISE program based on a lot of the work that we've done with Woodside. And it's really around helping organizations understand the best way to go through this digital roadmap. And it starts with the digitize. So what sensor do I use? Now, and when we see a sensor, that can be a camera, that can be a CO2 sensor, that can be an induction loop in the ground, you name it. We have hundreds of different sensors that we can use to capture that. So which is the right one? How do we connect that? So what's the right technology to connect the sensor? Should we use wired connectivity? Should we use wireless? Well, if we're going to use wireless, which one? Should I use Wi-Fi? Should I use Wi-Fi 6? Should I use narrowband IoT? Should I use LoRa? Should I use 5G? So what's the right technology? Should I use, BLE? So what's the right technology for that? And it all depends, right? But then once I get that data, what do I do with that data? Where does it go? Like, do I send it back to me? Do I put it in the cloud? Well, if I'm going to put it in the cloud, where do I put it in the cloud? How do I secure it in the cloud? How do I analyze that data in the cloud? And how do I gain insights from it? But then once I've done that, what do they then do to enhance or optimize the way I run my business, and how do I automate that? So we've done this many, many times with customers. So what we're trying to do here is to say, come into the center and we'll show you how. Now, WISE also has a couple of really interesting parts about it, that it's really focused around collaboration. So it's about bringing people together to basically, a rising tide lifts all boats. So people come together, sharing ways to do this. So everything that we have available here is available for people to use. So, and every time we find new sensors or new ways of connecting things, we bring it into the center and we make that available. And in the process of doing that, we bring speakers in, we have people coming in talking about what they're doing, and it's really focused on the collaboration. And I should point out here is that NERA, who's METS's sister group, one of the growth centers, Peter, has actually sponsored us as well, which has been really, really good. And again, seeing the benefit of this. Now, and I know Peter will come back to this in terms of intellectual property, and we'll spend a bit more time. The focus on WISE is really around sharing. So it's actually working on areas or challenges that are common. It doesn't mean that we can't do something that's specific to an organisation. We can, and we can make it confidential, and we can lock it down, and we'll come back to the intellectual property later on. Oh, sorry. Go back here. So what are some of the things that you get access? So that's a broad view of what WISE does. So here within the center, you've got exactly what you'd expect. You've got Cisco sitting here with all of our technology. You've got access to all of the university's resources. So now, and when I mean university resources, it's researchers, it's programs, and it's also students. And we do a lot with students and a lot with researchers, but very much on the applied side. So from a Cisco perspective, what's the right technology that we see? But you're not limited to Cisco tech, right? So we definitely are providing that connectivity, secure, scalable technology, but we bring all the technology that we can find globally through our innovation centers, everything saying, and we bring that back in. And we love to see other different types of technologies as well. You get access to the students, as I said, the researchers as well. And when I say access to it, it's actually sitting in here. So we've got equipment available. We're deploying things across the campus. So the third point there is many of the projects, Curtin University themselves are using it as a business. So looking at, okay, how do we measure and monitor these things? So you get access to that. And the final point there is it's a real focus for us to bring all of the members together to share and to basically help each other. So regular meetups, discuss ideas, challenges. And Peter, what's really interesting at the moment is the process of going, because prior to COVID, we're a very physically focused centre. We're now looking at the, I would say, the hybrid model where, if we take, I think although WA has been in a wonderful position from managing the pandemic, as we saw in New Zealand, it can quickly flip. So we're just going through the process now. So we'll run much more of a hybrid approach. So we'll have the physical, we'll have the complete virtual, and then we'll also have the hybrid approach to the running these. So as an example of a year of a life of a WISE member, these are the types of things that you get when you come in. So one of the things you do is you get access to the centre. We provide you capacity to sit in here and talk to other WISE members, researchers, students. We run 3 to 4 innovation workshops, do design thinking workshops. And it's interesting, lots of different models the way that we can do that. Industry leader technology learning sessions, innovation delegations, and projects. So, and I'm going to go through some of the example of the projects that we're doing. One of the points worth mentioning with WISE is that everything in the centre here is available for WISE members. But the best way to think of it is, name your favourite sports club, whether you're a golfer or a tennis, whatever you like. This is basically a club you join and you get access to all the facilities, and we help you. But if you need dedicated resources, so if you wanted someone to help you program manage, or you wanted a researcher and a student to engage with you, we have ways for the organisations to get dedicated resources. But there are additional costs. The actual WISE membership gives you access to the facility. And as I said, hosted networking events and industry hosted innovation events as well. WISE members, a range of WISE members here, the Cisco, Curtin, Woodside and Data 61 are the foundation partners, NEAR of course, and then Fortescue, Consolidated Minerals and Wesfarmers. And I think Lenka, we've got a whole bunch more coming, I think. Yes, not quite on the slide yet, but they're coming. Lots of different people working, organisations working with us over the past year. Okay, so Peter, what I'm going to now do is jump to, before I jump to examples, I'm going to give an example of an organisation that's come in here and how they utilised WISE to their benefit. I'm just conscious of time. Probably got another 5 minutes and then we'll get some examples, Peter. So we started working with Wesfarmers Chemicals, Engineers and Fertilisers a couple of years ago, and they were quite interested in the use of IoT or digital in their business. So they understood Industry 4.0, they realised it was important, they'd seen the migration, they saw the focus Industry 4.0, cyber physical systems, etc. And they said, well, how do we use that in our business? And we were lucky enough to connect with them and said, well, that's exactly something that we're interested in working with you. Would you like to come in and become a WISE member? Well, they were our first WISE member. And I think when we did the calculations afterwards, as the first WISE member, they got access to everything. They actually did reasonably well in terms of their investment. But they came in very interested. They heard about all these different technologies that were part of transforming the industries, the building blocks of Industry 4.0. But again, this is all theoretical stuff like the cloud. So, how do you actually use them? This is some of the work that they did with Telstra. This is from a Telstra. It says, and from a connectivity perspective, there's so many different things and ways to connect. Which one do I use, right? So, and you've got to be careful, right? Because if you talk to someone who sells LoRaWAN, they might see the right solution for you is LoRaWAN. Or if you're someone who provides 5G or 4G, they might say, look, the right way, the best technology for you is 5G or 4G. Well, how do you make the decision? And then how do you actually test that? And that's exactly one of the things that they did when they came in here. The other bit, and as I said before, is, okay, what sensor, what connectivity, where do I put this information and where do I transform it and how do I analyze it? And then what's the right process from a data lake perspective? And this is where we're very lucky in the engagement with Woodside, who have gone through and done all this. Do you start with massive data lakes and trying to understand and capture everything? Do you start with a business problem, et cetera, et cetera? So we go through and explain this to them. And then, of course, the fundamental here is security. So if I'm going to collect this information, how do I secure it? And then how do I manage it, automate it, and ensure that the data is valid and clean? And that's one of the biggest challenges that we go through. So all of these things are running through their head. And then they sort of had this overall plan of, in terms of a program, what's the best way of doing this? So they went through this, let's discover what these Industry 4.0 technologies are, let's experiment, validate, adopt, and then get to operational. So we've sort of gone through this transition with them, Peter. And I think, the final slide here is one example of what they actually did, which is, how they got some sensors from us. We lent them some equipment. We lent them both the LoRaWAN, some LTE equipment, connected that data, put that into a cloud service. And so from a storage perspective, we set the data center up for them, provide them with Elasticsearch and Kibana so they could visualize it. And then they started to look at, how they could actually use that. And the other key part of this was the number of people inside their organization that needed to be involved, right? So it's not just the IT, it's OT, it's business ops, it's processes. So how do you pull all this together? And as they went through this program. We work very, very closely with that, and they're quite mature now, and I think in where they are. So, in terms of their recommended approach for how do you utilize the Internet of Things, start with the use cases. And this is a really critical point. Don't start with the tech. Start with the challenge. What is one of the challenges that you have at the moment? So what's then the right technology? So an example here, they did use multiple technologies. And in the process of working with partners, build that in-house expertise. And I think one of the best examples or best way of explaining this to me was, I think it was one of the Woodside teams said, if you're the head of accounting, is it useful for you to have an accounting degree and background? Well, the answer is yes. So if you're head of a group that's focusing on Industry 4.0 and IoT, should you have that knowledge in-house? And the answer is yes, we think you should. So accelerate through external collaboration, partner early. So leverage and learn from every organisation that you can come across. So Peter, I'm just going to move to some example WISE projects, and then I might stop or do two, and then we'll open up to Q&A if that's okay. Good. All right, great. So this is one I will pick on WesCEF again. So this is a challenge that they had. So interestingly enough, your clean heat quick gas that you all probably know extremely well and love, those bottles need to be refilled, and they have a factory to refill it. So the question, and this is one of those challenges that not sure if it can be solved and can we do it cost effectively, was could we automate the process of determining how much gas was supposed to be put into a particular cylinder across different types, and could we automate the process of that? And the challenge they gave to us is, can we actually use image recognition to look at the stamp that's on the collar of the bottle, and from that analyze that stamp, and then provide us a lot of information which we could then use to automate what happens to that particular gas bottle. And it's not as easy as you would think, right? So brutally honestly, really it's a challenging problem. And the challenging problem is because the stamps on the bottles are different. They're not all the same. They are corroded. Some are painted over. So the question is, we humans are pretty good at looking them out and working out what it should be. So we did a project with one of the students here, and we used some machine learning approaches. So looking at the images and then training it on lots and lots of data, so we could actually automate the process. So the output of that project, which took us a few months, was to provide I would say, confidence to the WesCEF team that yes, you could use an automated approach to analysing gas bottles. Now, the challenge with that then is, how do you then put that into your manufacturing process? And that's something that we touched on, but that's something that they took back to within their business. And then the next one, and then I'm going to stop, Peter, because we have literally 30 of these, is something that we did with PTA. So the Public Transportation Authority had a challenge where they were getting foreign objects, things like stainless steel screws, get caught in escalators. And within 30 minutes, a very hard stainless steel screw can actually file the treads on every single tread to a razor blade within 30 minutes. And so the question they said to us is there a cost-effective way for us to detect that? And it was one of 6 projects that they brought to us. And we looked at a range of different technologies here. So this is where we come back to what sensor. Should we do vibration? Should we use cameras? Should we use heat? Should we do acoustics? And this was subsequent to a project that we did with Woodside. And we thought, well, because when we went down to the old railway bridge before they dismantled it, we actually put some foreign objects in that escalator, and it was immediately obvious just from the sound of it that we could detect something. So the question we said, well, can we actually listen to it and determine that we have something that's actually causing a problem? So we quickly prototyped a solution using a microphone and a Raspberry Pi. We actually recorded a number of different objects. We then spun up basically an amplitude detector in a Raspberry Pi, and we actually demonstrated to PTA, yes, it could be done. Now, at which that point they went, great. But now that's fine for a prototype. If we're going to put this into production, it can't be a Raspberry Pi that's an unmanageable device. What do we do next? And that's when then Cisco, working with PTA and the innovation said, okay, well, we need to now put a box inside your network. That box needs to be secured. So we actually use one of Cisco's little embedded routers. We actually used a software environment that's very secure. And we took the software that we developed on the Raspberry Pi and we actually moved it across into that secure container. And the results were woeful. It didn't work. And it didn't work because the algorithm that we used was an envelope detector. And that's not a particularly good mechanism for detecting these foreign objects. So this is when we benefit from the Curtin Institute of Computation. So we worked with their data scientists and said, look, this is what we've got. What's a better way? What's the best way of actually detecting that? And that's where they pushed it towards machine learning. So training it on what's normal and abnormal. And not only did they tell us this is what you should do, they also then gave us an example of the code. So we went from zeros to heroes in an afternoon. We moved from one technology to another. So we actually built a solution and we're in the process of actually putting that into the PTA network to automate not just the detection, but also the slowing down of the escalators when they do actually have a foreign object being detected. So Peter, look, I have lots and lots of more examples, but I know we did wanted about 20 minutes for question and answers, which I think we're at right now.
Okay, that's great. All right, thank you very much, Tom. Could you just unshare your screen then? Great. So we've got everyone back. Okay, so let's then go to questions. So we have one on the chat line, Tom, at this stage. And let me, that's probably one more for me. So I'll just read that out for everyone. So this is from Ati Aziz. Peter and Tom, I have a question on eligibility criteria. Companies must intend to develop solutions principally for the mining industry. How do you determine the portion of mining industry is major enough for us to be eligible, selected if our company is dealing with multiple industries? If it helps development of the IoT solution has been identified principally for the mining industry. Similarly, having substantial operations in WA, is that more for our manufacturing activities or where the products are used by the clients? Okay, so a couple of questions there. First of all, look, we're reasonably flexible and open in terms of where the application or how significant the application is for the mining industry. If it has an application in there, then we'd certainly be very, very happy to look at it. And we would expect that many companies will be cross-sector and supplying to multiple sectors, so that's fine. We certainly are not constrained by having it focused only on mining. Substantial operations, what we're really trying to capture there is the fact that to fully engage with this program, you really physically need to interact with the Innovation Central, with the site at Curtin University. So that really does require you to have significant parts of the operation and people within Western Australia. It can be manufacturing, it can be your sales, it doesn't really matter too much around that. As long as you've got people here who can engage effectively with the Innovation Centre. That's the key thing. Okay, so any other questions? Now, we can either put them on chat line or if you like, you can unmute yourselves and ask the question that way. So I'm seeing any questions? Not at this stage. Let me then, while we're waiting for some other questions, let me give you a little bit of information about process and timelines, because we put a little bit of that information in on the in our material, but not a huge amount. So maybe I'll just, if I can, I'll share my screen and show you a flow chart. Okay, so you should be able to see that. I have to get rid of some items blocking my view. So there we have, this is basically a flow diagram. So we're looking for applications to be submitted to us the end of August, 28th of August. We will then check whether they're eligible, and then we'll do some independent reviews of each of those applications, and make some decisions and select, say, the top 3 or 4 proposals. Will be selected towards the middle and end of, or towards the middle of September. We will then ask those organisations to submit to us, basically do a pitch to us, so we get a bit more detail around what it is that you're trying to do and why you're trying to do it. Those pitches will come through towards the end of September, and we'll then immediately select the companies that we want to work with and approve, and then notify you right at the end of September as to whether you're successful or not. So it will be a fairly short process in order to get to that point. So I'll just stop sharing that now. Okay, so I don't think we have any questions as yet. If not, I will ask another one. I'll ask one of Tom. Tom, in terms of IP, so let's just touch on that just briefly. If a company's got some sort of idea around an application that they might want to follow up, but don't, for as a METS company in the mining industry, they realise they don't have enough knowledge to be actually able to resolve it and develop it fully. How would they approach the project with you? And there are some issues around IP that we can probably elaborate on a little bit. So how are they going to be able to successfully engage with the centre, get some learning and understanding, which will then hopefully be able to help them develop a commercial product at the end of the day, because that's what they're going to be interested in.
Yeah, look, it's a really good question, Peter, and something that sort of raises its head all the time. So I think when we started Innovation Central Perth, the ethos we had right at the beginning was to ensure that everyone's intellectual property is owned by them, and any new intellectual property was owned by the organisation that came into the centre. Let me explain why that's important. Sorry, we've got two things going on here. So let me explain why that's important to us. So from a Cisco's perspective, the reason why is we built the Innovation Centre is to help our customers become more digital, right? So quite simply, we want them to adopt these technologies, and we want them to adopt the technologies because we see that as we come back to the digital vortex, it's really critical for them for their longevity, and we want our customers to continue to operate extremely well. So owning organisations' intellectual property that come in to help solve the problem, that's not something we're interested in doing. I mean, Cisco is very much focused on providing secure, scalable, automated networking technologies. That's what we do. From a Woodside perspective, Woodside would very much, help us solve problems, right? That's what we want. We don't want the intellectual property that you've got. We want you to help us solve a problem. And with Curtin was a bit of mix, right? So Curtin has, from a research perspective, they are interested in intellectual property, but again, they want the businesses coming through. So we were very clear when we set up Innovation Central that any organisation coming in, there would be no, if you like, poisoning of intellectual property, right? And if you wanted to then do a research engagement with Curtin to actually look at some intellectual property sharing, you would do that outside of Innovation Central. So that's the first thing. Now, within Innovation Central is WISE. And in WISE, the wireless industrial sensor environment, we modified the intellectual property to make it even more open. And what we said there was really quite simple, is that everyone owns their background intellectual property. Any enhancement of background intellectual property is owned by the organization's background. So let me give you an example. So you come in, you're working with us, and we have our WebEx board in the background, and during the process of working on that, we enhance that WebEx board. Well, that's our intellectual property. It has to be, right? Because otherwise we couldn't work with any organization. And that's the same for any, if, for example, if a company comes into their business, if there's any enhancement to their background, they own it. There's no problem. So the question then becomes on what do we do with new or foreground intellectual property under the WISE environment? And what we do in this very specific case, is if, there's a big if, we determine that there is new intellectual property, we assign it to Curtin University, who then gives all WISE members an irrevocable global right to use. So everyone can use it. Now, you might go, well, hang on a minute, I don't want to assign my new intellectual property to Curtin and give it to everyone. And we go, absolutely, no problem. So what we suggest you do is you work within the environment, and we have examples of this, you work within the WISE environment, and you go, actually, I think there's something there. There's something quite clever. At which point we say, don't do it under WISE, step out, and then you can go within the Innovation Central umbrella, or you can go directly to Curtin or to any organization you like, and then you can enter in and actually have a direct conversation on intellectual property. So net, so it's a very long-winded answer, Peter, but at the essence of what we're trying to do here in Innovation Central is to help new businesses develop new intellectual property. So we have no interest in making that more difficult for them.
Yep. Okay, great. So 8 minutes to go. We've got a couple of questions have come in on the chat line. One that's come in privately, so maybe to me, so maybe accidentally, so maybe that's not, it hasn't gone to everybody, but it's a general question. So that question is there a cost to participate in the program? Typically, I'll answer it, and then Tom, you can add some detail if you like. Typically, the cost of a membership is $10,000 for a year, an annual membership to the WISE program. For the WISE program, $10,000 per year. So METS Ignited is funding 2 of these membership programs. So the cost to the successful METS companies will be 0. Anything you want to add there, Tom?
Yeah, look, no, and again, it's another really interesting question. So yeah, I think we need to define what cost means. So as you sort of said from that, when I went through that project, one of the things that we typically say is, we don't co-innovate for you, we co-innovate with you. And it's a really important point. And I think to any of the members thinking of extracting value out of Innovation Central, there is a cost. And the cost is your investment, because we can't do it for you. You have to do it, and we help you. It's like playing golf or tennis. You don't join a tennis club and then someone else plays tennis. You've got to come in there. So, and this is one of the biggest challenges. And when we talk to organizations, they say, well, how long does a typical engagement last? And we go, it's completely dependent on the customer. Because we're sitting here, everything is running, you can come in here and use us as much as you like. We actually like that. The typical challenge is on the other side, because you've got to free up resources within your organization to do something you don't normally do. So there is a cost, but it's your internal cost.
Okay. Second question, and that is, I noticed there was a proposal assessment stage as part of the application process. Is that separate from the 2-page application form? No, the 2-page application form is what you have to fill in, and that's the first stage of the process. We will assess that initially, and from that, select a short list of companies. That short list of companies, we will then invite them to come in and present to us, either by Zoom or by WebEx or physically. Bring in a PowerPoint. Will take about an hour and talk to you about your project and what it is that you want to do. We find that that's a really successful way of really understanding and being able to make some well-informed judgments and decisions and selections on who gets supported and who misses out, unfortunately. So it's a 2-stage process: the written application, which is those application forms which have been provided or you can download, and then the second stage will be a physical presentation to us of your company and your ideas and what you want to achieve out of this, and then we will make a final selection based on that. Okay, so we have those answered.
Hi guys, I have a verbal question, if you can hear me.
Yes, please.
Yeah, Sean Webb here, CBH Group. So guys, my role is innovation and operations management in CBH. But my role is quite a catalyst role, and a lot of what we're doing is working with IT operations to expedite, IoT acceleration and adoption within the business. But a lot of it is co-driven by IT and IT operations. So I suppose my specific question is, who's the best type of individual or role to engage on the WISE program from your experience?
Hi, Sean. Good to see you again.
Hey, Tom. I'm surprised you weren't using cycling analogies and not the tennis analogy.
Yeah, I guess everyone. I've actually got video, but I don't think I'll share it for my last race. No, I'll get it, Sean. But look, it's a really, really good question, and sort of, we could spend quite a bit of time on it. So for the broader audience, IT and OT are coming together. So we know, I come back to that digitize, analyze, optimize, automate. So the business wants to optimize the way they run their business. IT are the organization who have the keys to connecting things, right? And if you think about it, if my data's sitting in the cloud, it's going to traverse the IT network. It needs to comply to a cybersecurity. We've got to be very careful putting things in an OT environment because it could cause issues. So IT are very careful about what gets deployed. But the business is saying, look, I want to move faster and I want more information. So we're getting this tension forming. Now, Sean, we're doing a lot with some of the large mining organizations in simplifying it. I will answer your question in a minute in terms of enabling the business to deploy what sensors, where and how they like, and then looking at the way that data comes through the business is secured and analyzed. But the challenge coming back to who's the best people to work with? Well, I think it's very interesting. We typically have these groups being formed, and we've sort of gone through an interesting wave where we had people saying, I need an innovation team, and the innovation team said, I'm going to set myself up and I'm going to innovate. And then quickly the business went, no, you're not, because you can't do it by yourself. And what we're now seeing, I think, is those innovation teams actually sort of not being consumed, but they're actually becoming closer to the business again. So they're still needed there, but they have to work very, very closely with the business. And I think then from the answer from the IT side, it's the CIO, or it has to be the CIO, CTO, driven by the executive leadership team that says, look, we need to move faster. Part of your remit needs to be, you need to be helping the business do this. So it's a combination of being driven from top down. So if you don't have that top down drive, Sean, it's hard. But if you do have, the CIO, CTO will be great. They're a good organization and we can talk to the challenges that we're having. And then hopefully you've exactly to your type of position is, people like yourself sitting in the business looking at ways to enhance it. So that's a very long-winded answer to your question. Does that help or can confuse things?
No, it does. I suppose it's, I looked at a little bit about the detail about the program. So, and as you say, the value is in turning up and in the involvement. So, just more on the involvement side and
yeah.
who you found.
Yep.
But being very important, I think, being top driven, I think.
Yeah, so where we've executed well is when the business has driven the engagement. So when the business says, we've got a specific challenge, and we touched on two of those. I mean, we literally have a litany of them. Where the business said, I've got a problem, and I don't know how to solve this or whether it can be solved. I just don't know how to do it. And that's where they come in and we show them all the different ways, and then we help them rapidly prototype. Now, we want IT with us because at the end of the day, we want IT to support it. But the right people within your organizations is the individuals who have a particular business challenge that we think technology and the actual the evolution, if you like, of technology is now to position that we can actually solve it. And if we look at any of the engagements that we've had, it's been the business that's driven it. And we try and get really really focused on what that challenge might be. So the gas bottle reading was one. Can we automate this? We know exactly what the problem is. Can we do this? Right. So that's an example where individuals within the business said, I've got that problem. Can you help me?
All right. Thank you for that.
All right.
Very
So
useful.
I think we're getting close to the end. Time is up. So any other questions from anyone? Nope. All right. Thank you very much, Tom. Really appreciate the presentation and the information. Very well presented and very clear. So I hope that yes, we get some applications. Now, anyone who's left on the call who's interested in putting an application in, if you want any more details, please contact me in the first instance, and also Tom. I'll be able to give you his contact details if you don't have them. So yes, so please, if there are any further questions, please contact us, and we'll help you out. Applications close at the end of the month, so I'm looking forward to seeing them from you. Thanks very much, everybody.